Preparing to live stream the meeting, setting up your meeting in YouTube. Here we go. Redirecting to YouTube. All right, we are live across the world.
Excellent.
Here on Wednesday evening. Almost forgot what day it was here. Welcome everybody to Sea of Tranquility. I'm your host, Pete Pardo, along with Mr. Martin Popoff. We've got a live show for you tonight. We got a pretty cool topic. We decided, so many people have been asking, you guys need to do more live shows on SOT. We've been trying to do that, but I haven't yet brought Martin on a live show, and I think it'd be cool for him and I to do a live show together. So here we are, and the comment section will be probably filling up before you know it. But today's topic is all about our top solo albums from members of key bands done while they were still in that band, right? So this will discount a lot of solo albums from guys who were with a big band and left and went and did something much later on, or the band broke up. And these are solo albums that are among our favorites, where the guys were still in that band, left to do a solo album, and then the band kind of continued on their merry way. So we've each picked 5, and I'm going to have Martin kick us off with his first choice.
All right. So mine actually already kind of bend the rules a little, I think, but not that much, right? So I'll explain. So my first pick, and I did these in order of most conservative to wildest in terms of relation to what they normally do. So here's my first one, Joe Perry Project with Let the Music Do the Talking. So essentially, this is coming out in 1980, right? He's part of the 1979 album, Night in the Ruts. Who knows what he's part of, right? It's so fluid with Aerosmith at this time. And then he's back, not on the next Aerosmith album, but the one after that. But so in terms of most conservative to wildest, and again, our picks are albums we absolutely love. It's like literally these are 5 of our favorite albums by guys, off the main track doing a solo record. So love this album, and I rated it I rated it least conservative because I really feel that most of what you get on this album could have been great Aerosmith songs. It's produced by Jack Douglas. You've got Ralph Morman on vocals, who came from the Bucks band before, and I think later he does some Humble Pie. He dies later as well. But David Hull is in here on bass guitar. He's from this band from, I think it's from Boston, local friends of Joe Perry's, right? Dirty Angels. So they had these couple of albums. So that's David Hull on bass and vocals. But as we all know, this the song off of this, the lead off track, the title track, went on to be done by Aerosmith, and it's done way better on here. This is a really smoking version of Let the Music Do the Talking. And then I think literally Conflict of Interest, Shooting Star, and The Mist Is Rising, so heavy, so cool. Those would have been top flight Aerosmith songs. And then you've got, I remember Discount Dogs was a little bit of a single at the time. Break Song is just a fast little instrumental. Ready on the Firing Line is pretty heavy. Life at a Glance is pretty cool. Rockin' Train is like one of those funky Aerosmith songs, but every single song on this is quite heavy. And I even found a little article. Where is that little article? Anyways, I found a little Rolling Stone article about Joe putting this thing together. And he said, I like songs. I'm not going to do an indulgent, crazy sort of guitar soloing type album. It's just an album chock full of songs, 9 songs. Joe does a lot of the vocals on it, and I think his lead vocals on this record, maybe it's because he's let out and he's free, are better than when he does his token vocal on Aerosmith albums. One last thing I want to say about that is that I had a diner dinner with in New York City with David Krebs one day, and he was telling me this crazy story that Joe had to do this solo album to pay for his room service bill. Like apparently he was just like spending so much money when he'd go to hotels and stuff. So they just had to put this together. There's a lot of skeletons in Aerosmith's closet, right, with the money and all that. So he kind of like, he's out of Aerosmith, he better go to work. And that was kind of the idea. And then they do this record, but Charlie Farron takes over on the vocals, good vocalist as well, pretty cool record. And then he does this record, which is kind of a real disaster. You know, you look at the picture of the guys on the back, and it reminds me of that Blackfoot, Rick Medlock and Blackfoot album, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And the vocalist is Mock Bell from this band. I remember on a vacation, I bought the white vinyl version of this Thunder Train album, 1977. Thought it was going to be so heavy. Look at the guys, and it's really crappy. It's kind of like a crappy New York Dolls album. But so Mock Bell is the singer. So I mean, every record, you know, it took a big drop down, but I've always called that, you know, pretty close to a 10 out of 10. I mean, it's like rocks and Draw the Line for me. So Joe Perry Project.
And ironically, he needed money to pay for room service. I mean, I thought the first thing you would say, he needed to pay for all the drugs he was doing, because obviously that was the big deal at the time with those guys, right? But man, they toured the hell out of that album. I mean, Joe Perry Project were on, like, opening up every major show in like the New York area right around that time, and for those couple of years. But from what I mean, everything I heard, they made no money, right? I mean, these guys were killing themselves out on the road. They made nothing.
Yeah, none of those records sold very, very well, and yeah, different lead vocalist on every one of them, right? Second one's kind of really scrappy and vibrant. The first one's kind of corporate, but just really disciplined and reined in, and just solidly rocking all the way through. And then, like I say, the last one, they just fell to pieces.
Yeah, I enjoy those albums. They're kind of raw and gritty, I mean, especially the first one, but I still kind of enjoy those. And I remember thinking how great the song "Let the Music Do the Talking" was, and thinking, man, that would have made a great Aerosmith song. And then when they did it, I thought it was pretty cool, but it didn't quite hit the high marks, I think, of Joe's album, right?
It was done with the big, thick, garagey, done with mirrors ethic, right? And on this record, it was done kind of really corporate and smooth, and it had a really good groove to it. It's an opening track, just like, you know, really kicked.
Yeah, good stuff. Good choice. All right, I actually made a last-minute switch to my list.
Okay.
Because I was talking to someone else today and realized that there was another solo album by another member of the same band that I actually like more than my number 5 pick that I had set aside. So my first choice today is going to be Journey to the Center of the Earth by Rick Wakeman.
Cool.
I originally had Elias of Sunhilla from John Anderson, which I like quite a bit. But then when I thought about it, I'm like, how the hell did I forget this? Because I really dig a bunch of Rick's early solo albums, and especially this one. I mean, this was a, you know, obviously he's still in the band at the time. It's 74. And he had this idea to do this big kind of like classical orchestral type of project, which he performed with his band with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall, obviously in London. And it's all about, obviously, Journey to the Center of the Earth. So it's this big fantasy tinged grand work. It's only 2 tracks. You got the Journey Recollection and the Battle of the Forest. So basically in Rick's band at the time, he's got Ashley Holt on vocals along with Gary Pickford Hopkins. You got Mike Egan on guitars, Roger Newell on bass, and Barney James on drums, along with Rick on, you know, a million keyboards. And it's just, I mean, if you love Yes at the time, so we're talking Fragile, Close to the Edge period, right? This is shortly thereafter that, Tales from Topographic Oceans, of course. And you like that big symphonic, bombastic, over-the-top Wakeman. I mean, this is it. To some people, this is too much, right? This is over the top Wakeman. And he's got a couple other solo albums that came out right around this time as well, which are really, really good. But I like the live feel of this. I think the orchestra brings a lot to this. The band is really tight. And, you know, when I think of Wakeman solo, I always seem to go back to this one because I like the fact that it's so just out there. It's, I mean, he was like, you know what, we're going to do it big. And we're going to do it even bigger. And that's kind of what he did here. And I think it holds up really well. And I was just listening to it before I went on the air, and I'm like, yeah, I got to pick this one over the other one. So sorry, John Anderson. I love this too, but I decided to make a last minute switcheroo. So there you have it. Journey to the Center of the Earth from Wakeman.
Apparently he has over 100 albums out. Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's Stephen Reed, who were just on a show before, we were just talking about that. It's like, and I was like, oh, what's he got? Like 60, 70 solo albums? He goes, I think he has over 100. I'm like, what? And the crazy thing is, probably out of all of those, maybe 10 are really good.
Yeah.
If that, right? I mean, it's just, that's one of those instances where quantity does not equal quality, right? Sometimes you need to rein it in just a little bit, but I think the early part of his catalog is actually really, really good. So that's my first choice for today.
Cool. Excellent. Okay. So my next one, again, in order of most conservative to wildness. So we've got a pretty conservative album here. Hands down, this has always been my favorite Yes solo album, Chris Squire, Fish Out of Water. Love this record. I went through the whole thing again just before we got on, and I could have put this in my perfect albums. I realize, just there was no letdown on this record. It's just the whole first side almost sounds like one song, with the whole "Hold Out Your Hand," "You by My Side," "Silently Falling." It's just a big, beautiful, epic prog ballad in a sense. And then you get to the second side with Lucky 7, where you've got the Mel Collins sax on there. It's got this kind of really nice, accessible, almost krautrock feel to it, a little bit Van der Graaf to it. But all throughout, you've got Chris just meandering around beautifully on bass, his gorgeous, gorgeous singing voice. I swear, he's probably my favorite voice in all of Yes. And then Steve Howe is pretty darn close to John Anderson as well. I'm not talking about singing, but I'm talking about voice. And Chris could sing too. That's the other amazing thing.
He's always been the secret weapon in that band. Always.
Yeah. And Patrick Moratz is on organ based in. So the whole idea was, you've got your Relayer shirt on. The whole idea was this was almost like the Kiss solo album situation, where they all went away and did solo projects and say, hey, what can we do on our own sort of thing? And I think this one is the very closest to what a Yes album would sound like. It really sounds like the Yes album, or close to the edge, or Fragile somewhat. And the other big star performer on this is Bill Bruford. He's recorded very conservatively, and he's playing really laid back, because these are just beautiful, beautiful prog songs, like a really sort of delicate architecture, but still full throated band. Not a lot of guitar. Chris does the guitar on it when there is guitar. But yeah, it's to me, this is pretty much the Bill Bruford and Chris Squire show. Bass, vocals, and drums. That's what it sounds like to me. And the melodies are just out of this world. I mean, my second favorite has always been the Steve Howe album, the second one, right? Little Over Beginnings, and I do love Elias, and I like Change We Must as a later on, but it's never been any other one for me than this one as the favorite solo album. So there you go, Chris Squire.
Yeah, I agree with you. That is by far, it's not even close. I don't think that is by far the best Yes solo album. And I got to echo what you said about his vocals. They're just absolutely gorgeous on that album. And when you listen to him all by himself out in the open singing, you realize how important his backing vocals have always been to Yes, whether you're talking the 70s Yes or 80s and beyond. I mean, that voice is always there. And now you think about, the band is still going on without him. It's like, wow, that's what's missing now, right?
Yeah.
As well as that bass playing. That's fantastic choice. I love it. Cool. I love it. All right. My next pick here is from 1995. So we're talking about Divinity's 12 Dances with God from Ian Anderson.
Cool. Yeah.
Of course, Ian of Jethro Tull. Jethro Tull was still a active band at the time, but he wanted to go and do this kind of this orchestral thing. All right. So this is basically music for flute and orchestra, performed by Ian and Andrew Giddings. Andrew Giddings, of course, was the keyboard player in Jethro Tull at the time. And it was a really interesting album when this first came out, because I remember, at the time, still am today, but a huge Jethro Tull fan always. And, they were at this weird point in their career where, things were kind of winding down. They're not releasing albums that often, but they had a couple good ones in the 90s. And you always got the impression, if you'd seen the band live, Ian's voice was he was losing his voice quite a bit. He was not able to kind of carry a lot of those older songs like he could, obviously. And you always wondered, would he ever kind of do something, because of, he's such a great songwriter. He's a great instrumentalist. Would he ever do something kind of along those lines? And then this comes out, and a string of other ones as well that would to follow, where he kind of moves off veering away from rock into, what do you even call this? It's orchestral. It's kind of new agey in spots, but absolutely gorgeous. And all of a sudden you realize what a amazing flute player he actually has become after all these years. And, Giddings handling all the orchestral arrangements. It sounds like a big orchestra playing, and it's just gorgeous. And there's so many melodies on here that are just absolutely beautiful. Not surprising because we've heard a lot of these gorgeous things throughout the career of Tull written by Ian. So many great pieces on here, but it plays really strong as a whole. I got to see him live on, I'm pretty sure it was this tour, maybe the one after. It's been a while. And that was a lot of fun, a lot of fun. So Divinities is my choice for, and way back, I'll tell you, because his solo album in the 80s, not so much. This really nice, and it made perfect sense as something that we would get from him. And I think that's why a lot of us Tull fans really like this so much, because we wanted to hear this side of him for so long. So yeah,
A little bit like John Anderson goes that way once in a while, right?
yeah, absolutely. Now, how come those two guys never worked together?
Yeah.
Anderson and Anderson, right? I mean, come on, it makes perfect sense.
That's really cool, actually.
Right? That voice with that flute. I mean,
Yeah.
it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right, so my number three choice is Pete Townsend with All the Best Cowboys Have Chinese Eyes. That title, very odd title. He said it was just, he was just thinking about all the great cowboy heroes like John Wayne and Clint Eastwood, and saying, they're always squinting, looking really mean. And there was a quote that said later, he said, it should win the award for stupidest title of the year or whatever, right? But man, love this record to death. We just did an episode of The Contrarians where I picked Face Dances as my favorite Who album. I thought I would just get pilloried for that, but the comments all came in. I mean, there was a lot of support for that. And part of my weird thesis was I was so swept up in the amazingness of Pete's output at the time. So it goes from Face Dances. There's Face Dances, but then there's Empty Glass, and then this comes out. And then I think 3 months later or 2 months later, It's Hard comes out. And then later we get White City, which is amazing as well. But this actually got a lot of abuse, and I think it's quite unwarranted, because I think people didn't get past the first couple of tracks where he's doing that spoken thing, and it sounds kind of pretentious. But you get into it, and there's just gorgeous, gorgeous songs on here, like North Country Girl, which is a Bob Dylan. But The Sea Refuses No River, I mean, just generally as a really nice ballad, but it's kind of proggy. I love Slit Skirts on this, which is kind of a semi-rockin' one. Somebody Save Me is good. Face Dances Part 2. I can't believe that wasn't a massive, massive hit. It's just so poppy and cool. And Stardom and Acton, I thought was a really cool sort of, it could have been a great mellow Who song. Really, really nice track. And I think that could have been a big single as well. And same with Stop Hurting People. So yes, it's a little more out there and creative and emotional. This is breakup times for Pete, boozing times for Pete, right? Empty Glass is a little more immediate and straightforward. Love it to death. But yeah, I think the reason part of the reason I love Face Dances so much and It's Hard so much is just, I just look at it as just this suite of glorious Pete-ness at this time, putting these records together. And they are true solo albums. I mean, he's doing a lot of stuff on here. He's got a lot of guest stars as well, but sort of a throughput through these is the likes of Simon Phillips and Mark Brzezicki. From Big Country as drummers. So there's a lot of cool drumming as well. So they're a little proggy. Chris Thomas's production is just so beautifully clear and clary and perfect across these records. And boy, the lyrics and everything, and hands down, I mean, even though this whole Contrarians thing was half an hour of me saying Face Dances is my favorite Who album, this I love way more than any Who album. And Empty Glass, I probably like way more than any Who album. So there you go, Pete Townsend.
Even more than Who's Next?
Yes, absolutely.
Well,
Empty Glass and that record, just two of my favorite albums of all time. Wow. Love them to death.
I do like that album quite a bit. I like those early 80s solo albums. And I think, at the time, you have to wonder, were people wanting a little more of a rockin' Pete than they actually got? But I think that was grown-up Pete Townsend. That's where he was. Yeah. And you got to give him credit for putting out albums like that.
Yeah. Yeah, just acoustic guitar and piano, and just so exquisitely put together and produced. And I just love his voice too. I mean, I'd rather hear him sing than Roger Daltrey in most cases. So yeah, Yeah, I really love those.
And the album cover with the flying V on it. I mean, if you're a guitar player, you gotta love that too. Not like he's a flying V guy, but
Yeah,
pretty cool.
but it's so artsy too. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
you've got, you know, I mean that's cool too with the double
neck. Yeah.
You know, on the inside you get this kind of weird, wacky story on one side, and then you get these pictures on the other side, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, really cool. Out there, fearless with his emotions. That's the main thing about it.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Why don't we take a couple questions while we're at it? What do we got here? We got 350 people watching, Martin. 350 people. All right. So I do want to make one little clarification here. I see a lot of people posting in the comments about solo albums from guys that they did after they left bands. All right. So we're not focusing on that today. So I see some great suggestions here, but that's kind of like not what we're talking about here today. These are solo albums that were made when these guys were still in these big bands. Let's see. What do we got here? We got any questions? Let's see. A lot of suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
We got someone says Martin's drinking beer while he was reviewing.
Excellent. Absolutely.
All right. What do we got? Not a lot of questions, just a lot of people putting their suggestions in.
Yeah, I know when we discussed this show, I mean, there are a lot of artists that, I mean, I wanted the first one I thought of immediately was Robert Fripp, Exposure, which I love so much, but it's like, well, they're kind of broken up at that point. So I kind of cheated with the Joe Perry, and I'm going to cheat a little bit with another one, but not fully cheat. We're not talking about, Peter Gabriel's solo career or Bruce Dickinson off doing Chemical Wedding and stuff like that.
Right. And I've seen a lot of that here. Yeah. So, and some other good suggestions here. I see Ken Hensley here. Proud Words on a Dusty Shelf. That's a really good choice. I didn't even think about that one. Yeah. So that's a good one. Don Dokken, Up from the Ashes. Dokken was pretty much on hiatus at the time, right?
Yeah. So what year would that have been?
That was what, 90, 91, 92?
88 for back for the Attack, right?
Yeah.
So and then I guess the next one is all the way up to Shadow Life, is it? So, and which is maybe 94 or something like that. So maybe on hiatus. And I don't know if I'd pick it as one of the greatest solo albums of all time anyways, right?
Yeah, it's a good one, but I agree. All right, so my next choice is from 1987. So, of course, the band that he's from is still a huge band at the time, and the singer decides to go out and do a solo album, which this one did pretty well for him, and I'd say arguably as good as any of his band's albums right around the same time period. I'm talking about Ready or Not by Lou Gramm.
Yeah.
Good rockin' album with a lot of really accessible songs. I mean, it had a number of hit singles here. The title track kicks off the album, heavy, a lot of guitars, great vocal on it. You got Heartache, got Midnight Blue was a tremendous hit for him.
Oh yeah.
Again, very Foreignerish sounding, right? It's got all the elements. Yep. You got Time, If I Don't Have You, another great song. She's Got to Know, Arrow Through Your Heart, another good rocker. It's just kind of like a lot of the Foreigner albums from the 80s. You had your mix. It's like a formula, right? And it works. You got your mix of hard rockers that are still really catchy and some of the ballads. And, it's almost like if you didn't know any better, you would think this was a Foreigner album.
Yeah.
And he's still in fine voice. I don't find the other solo album that came out a couple years later quite as successful as this one, but I can listen to this just as much as any Foreigner album from the 80s, and I really enjoyed it a lot. And I think he was kind of onto something, right? Obviously, the second album, like I said, not quite as strong from a songwriting perspective, but this one, top to bottom, is chock full of great songs, and I really dig it quite a bit.
Yeah. What's the other one called? Long Hard Look, Cold Hard Look, something like that?
I think Long Hard Look, I think something like that. Yeah, it's got the close-up picture of his face on the front. But not quite as memorable. This is really memorable. The other one, it's all right.
Yeah, and it wasn't like Foreigner was turning in amazing albums all that time either.
At that time, exactly. So just imagine if for that second solo album, because you're right, because Foreigner was kind of like almost dead in the water at that point. If he would have put in like a bang up solo album, kind of like this one was, he would have never looked back, right?
Yeah. Cool. All right. I made a slight switch for my next one. Not a big switch, but so my next choice is Phil Lynott with Solo in Soho, right?
Yeah.
There we go. So This is his 1981. I originally was going to put in the Philip Lynott album, 1982. They're both about as cool as each other, I think. I'm not crazy about when it goes into like the R&B styles or a little bit of disco or the experiment with Yellow Pearl. But why I quickly switched to this one was I love Dear Miss Lonely Hearts and Girls as two songs that could have been Thin Lizzy songs. And that is actually one of the narratives that was going on at this time. Snowy White, I interviewed him for the first time about a year ago, 6 months ago, something like that. And, he was saying that, the guys were pretty ticked off because Phil had a pretty fluid, there was a lot of drugs and all that stuff at that time. And he was the big rock star and everything. And there was a lot of fluidity between, whether things would end up on any given Thin Lizzy album at the time, Chinatown or Renegade, or whether they would end up on here. They would go and do these sessions and they had no idea which album it was going to show up on. Is this going to be on Phil's album or whatever? But both of these are songs that could conceivably have been on Thin Lizzy albums because they're just cool, semi-hard rocking poppy songs that fit, the mandate. And then you've got King's Call and A Child's Lullaby. Like the mellow songs on both of these albums are so cool. And then Solo in Soho, little experimental. Talkin' 79 is that ripping percussion and bass one where he's rattling off the names of all the punk bands. Yeah, Ode to a Black Man, Jamaican Rum. So you've got some of these where, so I've got this in the sort of middle of my list in terms of like how wild and how conservative is it. It's sort of expected, but not expected at the same time. I mean, he's putting in some of these black music styles so that he could never sort of do in Thin Lizzy. The mellow stuff he could do in Thin Lizzy, and the hard rocking stuff he could do in Thin Lizzy. So it's a mix of those couple of things. Jimmy Bain is one of his main collaborators. There's a cool Phil shot from,
There you go. Yeah.
The second situation. And there is the second situation. So he only made the 2 solo albums. And then of course this one, that awesome shot of him on the back, right? But this one has like Fatalistic Attitude, Old Town, Kathleen, these beautiful acoustic kind of Celtic, epic, sweeping, gorgeous songs, a little bit of Water. And then, the rest of it is Growing Up is another great one like that. And then the rest of it is a little more kind of experimental. But just a ton of different players, just like the Pete albums. The Pete Townsend where there's a lot of people, but they don't have a lot of roles themselves. This is Phil, more or less writing everything. Like I say, Jimmy Bain is probably his main collaborator. But the other reason I wanted to pick the first one is because there is a fair bit of Snowy White and Scott Gorham involved in the situation as well. Just love to death both of those Phil albums, and it's a tragedy we never got more from him. So,
do you think if he hadn't died, he would have continued to go down that road?
Well, there was the Grand Slam Road, which wasn't that great, which was more or less like a modern hard rocky thing, and the songwriting that wasn't that great. So who knows? I mean, I would have bet he would have just been dovetailing in and out of Thin Lizzy and doing a bit of this. It's not that he didn't like Thin Lizzy. I know he was a creative guy and he was a restless guy and he wanted to do this other stuff. But I think Grand Slam is probably like the worst kind of thing we actually did get out of him. There are other weird little rarities of him collaborating with people along that way. So he was busy even when he was, quite sick with addiction. He was still quite busy doing all sorts of crazy little projects and stuff and interviews and things. But I bet we would have saw quite a bit more Thin Lizzy, actually.
Probably. I you know what? I've really tried to get into the Grand Slam stuff, and maybe it's because he was such a mess at the time. I find it like second-rate Thin Lizzy and just not very. It's not all that appealing. It's appealing because he's involved, right? Yeah. But it just, to me, it sounded like it wasn't, nothing that they did sounded fully baked, if I could use the term, right?
Yeah.
It's everything I heard. Everything you hear is just sounds like, well, like they went and did some recording, made some demos. Here you go. This is what we got. And it's not quite the same. But again, you look at the circumstances, and that's probably not surprising.
Well, and they are demos. So it's not like, we got all the way to the end of the process. I mean, the songs certainly would have been better. How much better? Who knows?
Who knows, right? Yeah. Who knows? All right. What do we got here? Any other questions before we continue on? Brian Downey claims Phil had planned to reform the month before he died.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure he would have thought that probably every second day, right? You know.
Yeah.
And these two records, like I say, they come right between both of them. You got Chinatown as a 1980 album. The first one's a 1980 album. The second was an 82 album. They put out a studio album in 83. So this is all, and like I say, it's so wrapped together that nobody even knew what songs they were, working on.
Exactly. Someone says, do I like Mark Tremonti's solo? Yeah, I actually do quite a bit. I'm an Alter Bridge fan. I think Miles is a great singer and Tremonti's a great guitar player and a really good singer. So I dig the Tremonti stuff. It's pretty heavy, although Alter Bridge is pretty damn heavy too. Yeah, but I dig that stuff. All right. So someone asked favorite Kiss solo album. Well, good thing you asked because here it is. All right. Ace Frehley, produced by Eddie Kramer, released in 1978 along with the other three. So yeah, I mean, there was never any question when these solo albums came out which was the best. Easily this one. Paul's is damn good too. Peter's I think is a mess. Gene's should have been great. I think that's the one I was expecting the most of, and it really wasn't. It's pretty bad in spots actually, but this is really solid. Sadly, this would be still to this day is the best solo album he ever did, and he's done a bunch of them. But I really dig this album a lot. I was listening to this again the other day, and it still sounds really fresh. The production's great. You got Anton Fig on drums. You got Will Lee on bass, various other guys, and it sounds. I know it's kind of cliche to say this, but it sounds like such a New York City album. It really does. And that obviously was the intent. And of course, Ace is from the Bronx. So, Rip It Out, great hard rock tune. Snowblind is great. I love Fractured Mirror, of course, back in the New York Groove is a great, great song, great anthem. Speeding Back to My Baby. It's a fun album. The guitar riffs are great. There's not a ton of soloing, but just enough. It's not a flashy album. It's not like Ace is trying to say, hey, I'm the big guitar player in Kiss. Here's me playing. It's like a band effort. And it's so fun to listen to. And granted, I never thought Ace was a great singer. His vocals aren't great on this album either, but this is probably out of anything that he has sang on over the years, whether it be in Kiss or anything past it. This is the album where I can listen to his vocals and say, yeah, they did a pretty good job here. But it's a really fun album and easily the best solo album any member of anybody in Kiss has ever done. So there you go.
Cool. I'm glad you mentioned the production too, because I think the production of that album is better than Love Gun. It's better than Rock and Roll Over, and it's probably tied with the studio side of Kiss Alive 2. And it might actually be more vibrant and more alive than that, actually. Like I think the guitars are actually thicker than even those songs, but those songs are produced. The studio side of Kiss Alive 2 is really nicely produced as well. But and this album is very nicely sequenced, right? It's got a little bit of the super heavy stuff, and it's got New York Groove and Snowblind's amazing, right? Nashville Pussy covered one of their, I think it is Snowblind that they covered, right? Off of this record. But yeah, it's definitely a good album, and everybody loved it because it was, the heaviest one, and Paul's was next, right? So.
And it's one of those albums that, like, if you drive around in the car where you got a tape or an 8-track back in the day or a CD night, you put this on in the car, you put all the windows down. If you got a moonroof, you crank that thing open, you just drive around and just because every song, they're all anthems, all the words, you play air guitar while you drive. It's just such a fun album. Such a fun album.
Yeah.
Then you listen to Gene's album, you're like, oh, this is anything but fun, right? He probably thought it was fun when he was making it, but it's not fun to listen to, unfortunately.
All right, my number one choice. And I love creativity. I love guys who are fearlessly creative, and I'm a big booster of this guy. Maybe a lot of people don't like this stuff. I think it's a love it or hate it artist, but I support him to death. It's Bill Ward with When the Bow Breaks. So this here is the, where are we? We're over, hang on, there we go. So this is the original artwork for it with the two roses. And then it was reissued. This is a 97 album. And it was reissued with this vintage cool picture of Bill. This here is the back cover of the Straws single that he sent around to friends. So I've got a copy of this here. So this is a CD single of a song that's after When the Bow Breaks, but it definitely fits the style of When the Bow Breaks. Now, I rated this my wildest. Also, this is the one that kind of breaks the rule a little, but I know you and I talked about this, how literally I think I definitely wanted to make a point that out of all the solo artists, Ozzy is the most, it's commercial product. There's certain things to do. There's certain constraints. It's got to be like this. It's hot topic metal, whatever you want to call it, right? Tony, unfortunately, he's the guitarist, so he's got to get a bunch of guest stars in, or Glenn Hughes has to take over the thing and kind of be the most important guy in the band in a certain way. Geezer was actually pretty cool and creative with what he did. I mean, that whole thing with the sort of futuristic sound of the Geezer band, however you want to spell it, right? It was a nightmare. But Bill, I think one of the cool things about Bill, I really think Sabbath could have been a way more creative force if he was allowed to do more in the band, because these records Accountable Beasts is even more out there. But even Ward One Along the Way caught a lot of people off guard. That 1989 album, so he's a proggy kind of guy. I consider him almost like this Roger Waters guy that you never thought was there. He's progressive. He's creatively fearless. There's female vocals on here. There's mellow stuff. There's a little bit of horns. But there's just this gorgeous, like I say, creatively, like really out there. Like I'm just gonna, it reminds me a little bit of like Sabotage and Superzar and songs like that, right? Am I Going Insane? You didn't really get him blossoming as a creative force across the likes of I'm All Right or Swinging the Chain. It's only when you get up to this, you go, wow, this guy's just been the drummer in Black Sabbath. That's what he was. He wasn't writing anything. And then the last thing I want to say about Bill, I love his voice. He has an incredible, really, really interesting voice. And so there's voice, and can you sing with it, right? He can sing too. You're not like thinking, oh my God, is he going to hit the notes? Is he a little flat? Is he a little sharp? He can sing, and he has this really, really cool voice, which again reminds you of Roger Waters. Across this stuff, it's almost like there are no rules. Anything goes. It's a little bit Van der Graafy in terms of the drama and the pathos of it. But no, I tell you, and this song here, if anybody wants to go and just like see Bill's best foot forward, because like I say, a lot of people find this stuff really annoying and they'll just run the other way because it's so not Black Sabbath and so surprising. But check out this song and check out the production and the progginess and the lyrics and just the weird arrangements, and then check out his voice. Like, this song itself is an absolute masterpiece. And he's the John Paul Jones of Black Sabbath, but he never got to actually be as creative as he could have been. So there's my number one choice, and it's number one because of the absolute creative fearlessness of this guy, and he was just the drummer.
Yeah, I haven't heard a ton of his solo stuff. What I have heard is really out there. And again, you're absolutely right. You would not expect it from him. Yeah. He totally, Bill Ward was never all about Children of the Grave. Not at all. Not even close, right?
Yeah.
Not even close. That's
yeah. And he's, I mean, whether he's drumming on these records or not is just an afterthought. He doesn't even care. He's here or there a little bit. It's like drumming. Like, well, who cares about drumming? I'm here to sing. I'm here to tell you my thoughts.
Yeah.
And like the lyrics are incredible. They're so socially conscious and political, and yeah, delivered with that voice. It's just like the secret weapon voice that nobody ever gets to hear, because these records, nobody knows anything about these records. They're so under the radar.
Yeah, absolutely. They're under the radar. Yeah. Most people don't even know they exist.
Yeah.
All right. So we got any questions here before we finish up here? Martin Popoff, always the contrarian. Absolutely he is. He labels himself the contrarian for a reason, guys. I got a question. I know you guys love Dream Theater, but do you dig James LaBrie or John Petrucci's solo albums? I think I've heard all of LaBrie's solo albums. They're pretty good. They're pretty good.
I like them better than Dream Theater. I remember I wrote the bios, the record label bios for I think the first two or whatever, Mo Musler. I really dig them because
they're more straightforward. Yeah.
Yeah, they're more about vocals and melodies and lyrics even. I think in terms of just being a little more earthy, down to earth, I suppose. I mean a little less explosive, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's a little stifled in Dream Theater, obviously. They don't use a lot of his lyrics. He'll get a couple on an album. But and as far as Petrucci's, I mean, his instrumental stuff it's top notch. It's very memorable and melodic, especially the most recent one. So I dig them both. Mm-hmm. I dig them both. Clayton Cheney says Bill Ward was always a jazz drummer in a metal band.
Yeah. But like I say, I mean, my favorite thing in the world about Bill Ward now, after all these years, into old age, for good old Bill, will we ever see the Beyond Aston album? I mean, my favorite thing about Bill after these surprising solo albums is his voice and his lyrics.
Yeah. Question for Martin. Do you have a favorite Nick Drake album song, if any?
Oh my God, Nick Drake. Yeah, I love Nick Drake. So it's 3 albums, right? And I think the last one is the one that's the most kind of filled up with arrangements. So either of the first 2. And the one thing I love about Nick Drake so much is that you compare the acoustic guitar work that you hear on those records to the guy who gets all the credit for cool, thoughtful acoustic guitar, Jimmy Page. And Nick Drake, I mean, just every second or third song is more complex and more interesting and more fresh throughout those records. Yeah, I love that guy. It was an amazing and short career, right? Very
short, yeah. So we got someone here who says, I happen to think Ace Frehley's Space Invader is every bit as good as his first solo album. I wouldn't say that, but it is one of his better ones, especially in more recent years.
Yeah, the last few. I mean, I don't want to see him doing covers albums.
God, no.
To me, I think. But I love his latest stuff. It's better than the sort of Frehley's Comet and Trouble Walking sort of era, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Pete, does Peter Hamill's solo stuff count? Yeah, absolutely. And I think because he was doing solo albums all throughout when Vandergraaf was still recording. He did a bunch while they were on hiatus. So he has always done solo albums. But I kind of
Targets. Wow.
Love that. Oh, yeah. He's got a lot of good ones. And I completely forgot about him when doing this exercise because he's got a couple that are just great. Really, really good. Yeah. Let's see. We got anything else here before we get on to my last pick? Let's see what we got. Do you guys like Victor, the Alex Lifeson solo album?
Pretty interesting. You could almost do a whole episode comparing that to My Favorite Headache, right? Yeah. Because they both sound like Rush in the 90s. And Alex's is just a little more daring and out there and a little more dissonant Robert Fripp or King Crimson, and Geddes is a little more behaved, but they're really closer together than people sort of think, right? Especially the production of them and the arrangements, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. All right. My last pick of the day here is an album that came out in 1975 while this gentleman was still in Genesis. And of course, we're talking about Voyage of the Acolyte by Mr. Steve Hackett. I mean, this is like the perfect example of a guy who was wasn't utilized to his fullest within the band that he was in, and yearning to contribute more. He had so much creativity, so much stuff he was writing and thinking about that, went out and did the solo album while they were still, this is right around the time Trick of the Tail, Gabriel's gone. Phil's taken over the vocal slot in Genesis, Trick of the Tail, Wind and Wuthering, right? Which is still a pretty fruitful period for the band for Genesis. But, Hackett wants to write more. He brings to the table all these songs, which are like, nah, it's not quite a good fit. So he's like, all right, guys, well, I'm going to go out and do a solo album. And they were like, okay, you have our blessing, right? He gets a bunch of the guys on, to play on it. Collins is on this, Rutherford's on this, a bunch of other people are on this. And it sounds like a Genesis album. It's like, what is so not Genesis-y about these songs that they couldn't use more of them in the band? Yeah. I mean, it's the perfect example of a guy who's wants to contribute more, does a solo album that sounds more like classic Genesis than a lot of the stuff that they would do afterwards. And the funny thing is like he would eventually leave the band because they afterwards, when they saw how well this did, they didn't want him to do any more solo albums. And he's like, well, you know what, guys, I got to go then, because I have this creative well that's just bursting inside of me, and I've got to go and put it to use. And he would go out and put out these string of solo albums, and arguably he's still doing it today, of albums that sound more like classic Genesis than anything they've done since.
Yeah.
And so many great songs on here. The production is fantastic. And another thing too, it's like you listen to this album and Spectral Mornings and a bunch of the other albums that came afterwards, and you're like, holy cow, this guy is one of the greatest guitar players on the planet, which, he was really good from what he played in Genesis, but it's almost like they never really let the real Steve Hackett, I was almost said Steve Howe, too many Steves. It's like they didn't let the real Hackett do his thing on those Genesis albums. As great as his contributions are, but then you listen to this and you're like, because there's still plenty of keyboards on here, lots of vocals, all that kind of stuff. It's not like these are guitar dominated albums, but man, the classical guitar, acoustic guitar, the brilliant electrical work. I mean, just incredible stuff. This had to be on my list. It's number one on my list because it's one of my favorite solo albums by any guy in any band. So
wow,
there's my pick.
Cool. Yeah, and the most Genesis-like. I mean, I loved Cured, but it's not Genesis-like. And then Highly Strung, and I love the later stuff. And and his big thing is like the acoustic work, the Spanish guitar work, the howling feedback work. And he was one of the first guys who's in that conversation pre-Eddie Van Halen about tapping, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, all those, the sparing little bits that you got along various different members before Eddie used it a lot and became the guy kind of known for it, right? But the one thing about Steve Hackett that I just always amusing to me that I don't like is that he's a little bit, I always compare him to Roger Waters, because there's a huge pile of noise and then there's a beautiful quiet thing. And then there's another huge pile of noise. With Steve Hackett, it's squalling, feedbacking electric guitar. With Roger Waters, it's explosions or things breaking, right? It's just, with him, it's sound effects essentially. Like, but this audio dynamic between deafening noise and quietness, right? And then his quietness is just like him mumbling somewhere or whatever, and some other sound effects, right? But with Steve Hackett, it's like, okay, Spanish guitar, beautiful, Steve's singing, there's no drums or anything, and all of a sudden there's
out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
It's like a plane taking off. Yeah.
And you could tell maybe which side I land on. I mean, I just want all that quiet Steve Hackett. I just love it to death. All those mellow songs, introspective songs that he's, Till These Eyes and things like that off recent albums, right?
Yeah, and another thing too, and I know everybody has different opinions on it. It's like there are times where I don't mind, because he sings on a lot of his albums. He's had plenty of vocalists work with him as well, both male and female. There are times I don't like his vocals at all. There are other albums where I don't mind them as much. I think I don't mind Hackett when he sings a couple tunes on each album and lets other people do the rest. It's the albums where he sings everything, where after a while I'm kind of like, all right, I'm getting a little fatigue of his vocals. And he's a super nice guy. So I don't never like to say anything bad about him, but it's just like, he's not the greatest singer in the world. He's not the worst by far, but I'd rather him just write the songs, put all those lovely layers of guitars on them, and let someone who is a really, really fantastic singer fill in the rest of the gaps, because I think the songs are there, and sometimes they deserve that kind of vocal dominance, which he can't always give. But I get it. It's a true solo album. He kind of wants to do it all. I totally get that. So
Cool. Great choice. Yeah.
All right. So let's see if we got any last questions here. We've got over 500 people watching, Martin.
Wicked.
Let's see what we got here. Blaze Bayley was lost in Iron Maiden. And we got so we got a couple of people saying how great his solo albums are, but yet what happened in Iron Maiden?
Totally agree. I mean,
right?
he's a great artist, right? All of that solo stuff is so cool. I mean, he just found his place, and he brought to both situations a really cool voice, but it just wasn't, it just didn't get used right because the songs were kind of so bad, really, that he was given. It's not his fault that those records aren't great. I mean, Steve Harris was going through a lot of stuff, but yeah, talk about an artist that just blossomed on an amazing solo career and such a work ethic too, right?
Yeah. Just a bad fit in that band. That's just what it came down to, Thoughts on the solo albums from members of Queen? So notably Roger, Freddie, and Brian.
Wow. So I would say, Brian, you really only have more or less Back to the Light. And I saw that tour. That was incredible, seeing that just right in my neighborhood at the Danforth Music Hall. Cozy standing right outside. This before I was ever in the business, and I wouldn't even dream going up to him. But it's like Cozy Powell standing there, and I just walked right by him, right? But and I love the show, but not a huge fan of that album after a lot of years. Freddie obviously made the absolute worst solo albums of all of them. They're like all the worst material off of Hot Space, right? And Roger, I love Roger's solo albums. Roger's great. I love The Cross and Strange Frontiers and that stuff, and Fun in Space or whatever it's called. I mean, what a great voice, and they're just playful and fun and action packed. There's so much cool stuff across them. He's got a sense of humor. There was even something I remember thinking there was something even Springsteen-esque about some of it. I don't know why I thought that. Maybe it's his voice or something. But yeah, out of all of them, Roger wins for me.
Yeah, his are pretty fun. When Back to the Light first came out, I dug it quite a bit. But I got to tell you, over the last like 25 years, rarely play it. And the couple times I pulled it out, I'm like, yeah, there's a couple really good songs. The rest of it is just pretty forgettable. With that lineup that he had on the album, you thought it would have been, fantastic, but not quite. What else we got here? Here's a question for Martin. Who would you have loved a solo album from back in the day?
Wow. Let me think. Obviously Bill Ward. Who knows what that would have sounded like. Wow. Aerosmith, Kiss. Man, who knows? Who knows? A Joe Perry album, obviously, in 1976 or 75 would have been pretty incredible, right? But, as we've talked about, with these guitarists, they always have that trouble. It's like, okay, the lead singer is the most, the most recognizable and kind of the most useful in the whole situation, right? So these guitarists, they have to do that stuff where they get, various singers in or whatever, which happened up into the CD age, right? So, what does a drummer do? What does a bass player do, right? So that's why a lot of these solo albums are really cool, because you find out they've got amazing voices and they're great singers, right? So even though they weren't the lead singer in the band, who do we have here? We got Joe Perry sing, Bill Ward, I love him to death, Chris Squire, we both love him to death, right? Steve Hackett, he's singing too, right? So you're getting these guys who aren't the key singers in the band, but they can bring that usefulness to a solo project. So it's not just like, oh, I'm the tambourine player. Here's my solo album, right?
Yeah. I mean, another good example too, and you and I talked about possibly using him on this show before we realized that the band was actually not together at the time, was John Norum from Europe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he put out those couple of solo albums. All of a sudden, wow, he's a great singer.
Yeah.
And a good songwriter. We already know he was a kick-ass guitar player, and that I would have easily picked Face the Truth, or even was Out of Control, I believe is the one that was right before or right after. I forget whether it was before or after, but he had 3 in a row, which were great. Didn't quite qualify for this discussion because he was not in the band at the time. But yeah, it's like we would have never known that, right? Because he certainly doesn't do any singing in Europe.
So I'll tell you one that would be pretty cool. I don't think we got one, if I can recall, but Keith Richards, right? Because Talk Is Cheap is 86 or something. I love that guy's voice to death.
Yeah.
And he's the guy that wants to be the traditional Stone. Like, that whole album is just so cool. Yeah. Talk Is Cheap is just amazing, right? So a Keith album in the 70s, that would have been pretty cool.
That would have been really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been really good. Yeah, I like all his solo albums. A lot of fun.
Yeah.
A lot of fun. What else we got here? Steve Lukather's solo stuff. I love Lukather, and I love his solo albums. They're basically, if anybody likes the Toto album Kingdom of Desire, which is the early 90s album that Toto did, that's basically what Lukather's solo albums sound like. They're big, they're ballsy, they're guitar heavy, but man, they're so tuneful, so melodic, so memorable. And everyone he's ever put out has been a lot of fun and really cool, and has some pretty kick-ass guitars. He is such a hilarious guy with so many stories. I would, people always ask me, it's like, well, Pete, if you could pick one guy, well, three guys, whatever the number is, who you'd like to sit down at a bar with for an hour, have a drink, and just talk to them off the record, who would it be? Lukather's got to be up there. Every interview I have ever seen with this guy is so engrossing. He just seems like the most fun out of any of these guys. He's done it all. He's played with everybody. He's recorded on 500,000 albums. He's done all the crazy rock and roll stuff. He's hooked up with all the chicks. He's played with every great musician, and he's still alive to tell it. And he still has a sense of humor about it, as much as he's gotten screwed over in his career. It's like, that's the guy I want to sit down and talk to.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember, wasn't there some story about him feuding with his neighbor over noise or sound or something, and they blasted his wife or something, blasted music at his neighbor or something?
No, here's what this was. I don't know, like 6 months ago or something like that. It was during COVID. His neighbor was having some kind of project done in his backyard, so they were out there hammering and nailing and making all sorts of racket every morning, like at the crack of dawn. And finally, Steve was like, "I can't take this anymore." So he gets up one morning, brings his guitar and his amp out to the edge of the property, and just starts wailing on his guitar at like 6 a.m. And he goes, "Good morning," or whatever, like, "Fuck you," or something like that. And it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. And that's what he would do. He's so wacky like that. He probably got to the point where he's like, "I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm going to go give him a taste of his own medicine." What else could Steve Lukather do? Yeah. Crank up that guitar, make some noise, right? So
cool. Good.
Classic stuff. Peter Wolf from the Jay Giles Band. Yeah, he had a bunch of solo albums, right?
Yeah.
Steve Jones.
Yeah, so he had at least one, right? I don't know much about what Steve did. Was he part of Checkered Past too with Michael DeBar? Maybe not. Maybe that was a different guy. Was that just Paul Cook and Michael DeBar? There was a little bit of a punk super group at one point.
Yeah. We got a couple requests, and I almost backtracked and picked David Gilmour, who
had
a couple really good ones.
Yeah.
A couple really good ones.
I love About Face. I was in my bass playing phase where I had a bass with the action about 1.5 inches off the and I was learning all those fretless bass solos on like there's a really cool one on there, but that was a great album.
Yeah. So we got Cloverman. It's 3 a.m. here in Greece. Wow, you're still up.
Wow.
Dude.
Cool.
He says, "I choose Halford's first album." Well, he was out of the band at that point, right? So that does not actually count.
Yeah. And when I think of a record like that, I almost feel like it's not really a solo project. It's more like it's a band situation with a producer, and is Bob Marletta all over the first one? He probably is, right? I think he is. But I don't know. It just feels like when you're in a super heavy metal situation like that, it doesn't really feel like a solo thing.
Yeah. All right. Our last question of the day. Martin, do you like Silverhead?
Oh yeah, so they're Michael DeBar, right? Back then, right? Yeah, they were pretty cool. Little oldie moldy sounding, right? It's a little Wild Turkey and Free and Bad Company and all that stuff. And what else? What else would we compare it to? New York Dolls a little bit.
Little New York Dolls, a little Bowie. Yeah, I dig it. I think I like Detective.
Savage. Was there 2 records?
2 records, yeah.
2 records, yeah. And then we got Detective for a couple records. Right?
Yeah, I like Detective better, actually, but I like them both. I think he's a really good singer,
I think I did an episode of History in 5 Songs, which was about these bands that sound like just a mess of tangled directions. And one of them was, I think I covered Detective, Widowmaker, Mott Without Ian Hunter. So there were just a few of these bands that's like, what are we doing here exactly, right? Are we a prog band, a hard rock band? Are we like a Zeppelin-esque band, like whatever, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
There's a lot of those out there.
Yeah.
So many. All right, everybody. Well, thanks for watching. We appreciate it. This was a fun show and some pretty cool solo albums. It's funny because like there's so many solo albums that have been released in rock history, but yet not a ton of really notable ones. That's what makes these all the more special. While these guys were still in these bands, so a lot of solo albums after they left. I mean, those we do 5 shows on that, but I think this was a little tougher for us to choose, and I think a little more fun to talk about. So. Want to thank Martin for once again adding so much to this channel. We greatly appreciate everything he does here on Sea of Tranquility. And I got to be honest, I love having Martin here to bounce stuff off of, because there's nothing excites me more than a conversation about music with Martin Popoff. Yeah. So trust me on that one. And thanks to all the 500 something people who are still watching right now. We appreciate it. Visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. You guys ready for a big announcement? All right. I was going to keep it quiet. And then I said, screw it. I'm going to announce it on this show. So tomorrow night, I talked about this show that's going to be all about favorite double albums, right? Okay. My special guest joining me on that show is none other than Mike Portnoy.
Wow.
Tune in tomorrow night. Mike Portnoy and I will be talking about our favorite double albums of all time. This is any genre. So it's going to be prog, metal, classic rock, jazz, whatever, it doesn't matter. So Mike and I are going to be talking about some of our favorite double albums. So and studio albums, not live albums. So stay tuned for that tomorrow. That'll be a lot of fun. We also have another live show tomorrow with the crew from the Monsters Den. So Chris Allo, Rich Catino, and myself talking about what is the topic we're talking about tomorrow? Holy crap. What are we talking about tomorrow? Another monster show. I've completely spaced out of what we're talking about tomorrow. Anyway, tune in if you love horror movies. That's coming up tomorrow. So for Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining.